Welcome to Starting a Technology Company. So today we're going to be talking about go-to-market strategy. Go-to-market is just how you sell your product, and go-to-market typically includes what you would classically think of as sales and marketing. I don't actually know why it's called go-to-market, but you just hear that a lot. People will refer to it as such. And so the context for this is you've got a good sense of what you're building with the MVP. And now you got to get people to actually use your product. So this is the practical, how do we go out and get customers? And so you've got some personas you've defined, you have some segments you've defined. Ultimately, you have an ICP, which is where we're going to focus today. And really what we want to know is just what's the simplest way to go from no customers to customers, and what are the most common approaches to that? And then I'll give you an example of doing some analysis around that as well, so you can see how you build out the plans for it and a little bit about how you measure it. We will cover again B2C versus B2B. Those are your two big strategies for go to market, and how you do it in consumer facing companies is different than B2B companies. We'll talk about some of the most standard channels that you'll see, which is how you go out and get customers, the manner in which you get customers. Talk a little bit about early efforts. So how do you actually do some experiments, see what works, and then tweak it over time, and ultimately we will get a sense of how do you measure success there. The core reason this is relevant to starting a company is not too complicated. It's like, right, at the end of the day, a company exists to serve customers. And if you don't have customers, you don't, generally speaking, have a company. The subtle version of that, though, which is quite important, is what you really want is a repeatable and efficient way to get customers. So a repeatable method is one that I can do over and over, and it has a predictable outcome. And an efficient method is ultimately going to be measured in something called CAC, the cost of acquiring a customer, which means that I can get these new customers efficiently and effectively. And if you break either of those two maxims, it has problems. If you can't repeat it, that is a cap on how much your business can grow. At some point, I can no longer repeat this process of getting new customers. That means there is some ceiling on how high you can grow the business. And if you can't do it efficiently, generally speaking, a lot of times the business model just doesn't make sense. There's just no way for the customer or for the business to actually work and scale. Um, B2B models, radically different, but neither one is better or worse. They're just different. And so there are some tactics that overlap, but generally speaking, we will keep things split up into those two buckets. As I mentioned, go to market, that's just your plan for doing sales and marketing and getting customers. You'll hear us talk a lot about channels. Channels are just the way in which customers discover your solution and ideally ultimately start using it. And you can think of channels as choices. Do I want to go through a paid channel, which means I'm paying for ads to get in front of customers? Do I want to go through a content channel, which means I'm creating content? Do I want to go through a social channel, et cetera? Again, there's no correct way or incorrect way. They're just different options. We will talk today about sales and marketing funnels. Sales and marketing funnels are a way to envision or think about the progression of a customer from not paying, not interested to us, to paying and engaged with us. And a conversion rate is how you tend to measure the efficacy of a sales and marketing funnel. So a conversion rate is the rate at which prospects move forward through the stages of a funnel. And we'll talk about a funnel in depth, so it'll make more sense then. And the only other thing we'll talk about today and give you some more definition on is a buying committee. We talked a little bit about this last time, but particularly in B2B businesses, there are a lot of different people that go into the process of purchasing. So there may be a primary buyer, there may be somebody that uses the software. Those are often different, but there may also be things like influencers and gatekeepers and procurement that get in the way. And so we just want to understand those things. Ultimately, though, right, you've got this MVP, so you got a sense of what you're building. You have a sense of who you're going to build it for. You define the personas, you define the market. Now you have to actually get them to pay for your solution, right? And pay, I'm using sort of broadly here. This could be paying in the form of subscriptions or in the form of usage as they go. Paying could also be in the form of attention in terms of like advertising-based businesses. Pay is really how do I make money from the business? How do I translate this thing I built into dollars that are coming into the business ultimately? And the foundation is there, right? So you've defined your opportunity, you know who you're selling it to or who you're going after. Those are your personas. You've defined the area of the market you're going after. That's your ICP. You've defined the core set of features you have in your product. That's your MVP. You understand how your business works from a fundamental level, how it makes money. That's your business model. And so now it's okay, I got to start getting money going through this business. And generally speaking, I kind of think of it in three big buckets of stuff that you're trying to do. The first is you're just trying to get awareness in the market. And that's really the answer to the question of how does a person learn about us? And that can be about our company as a whole or our solution or both of those things. But how do we go from having no presence in a person's mind to presence? And that's an awareness. And a lot of the times that's mostly what marketing is doing. And the second thing is, okay, now they're aware of me. How do I get them to take some action? Ideally, that action is actually purchasing a product. And that tends to be the process of sales. And then finally, there's this question of how do I know how effective either of those two earlier ones? And that's a question of metrics and analysis. And ultimately, that can be gathered from a bunch of different things. And in general, what you see is there's specialization in functions of those in different areas of the company. So marketing tends to focus on awareness, sales tend to focus on conversion, and then product, which is the development organization, tends to actually be doing a lot of the analytics behind that. But also marketing does a little bit of the analytics as well. So when we start to think of a go-to-market plan, the first thing we're going to do is start off with really, really clear definitions of who we're targeting. And this we have actually already defined. So an ICP or an ideal customer profile says, here is the area of the market we're targeting. And that is the most concise or specific definition of who we're going after. Sort of outside of that, we have general sketches of the people that we're targeting. Those are our personas. If we are selling into consumers, we may have a demographic profile for those personas. So that could be the ICP definition. If we're selling to companies, we tend to have a firmographic profile, which is like demographics applied to companies. And so that lets us refine and search databases for these people. And the last couple things we need is just like what's working in their life, what's not working in their life. So general pains and goals for the personas. And then what's the set of stuff that relates to our product, solution specific pains and goals. And we'll use those to define what we think of as core messaging a little later on. So you've already got all that stuff. So you actually have a pretty concise definition of who we're targeting. Now, this week, what we want to understand is, okay, how do we go after them? What are the channels we're going to use? And what is the strategy we're going to use in those channels? And the only note that I would give you on go to market plans is these are never perfect and they are never done. So you are not trying to go for this perfect, timeless, age old go to market plan. It's do something that's good enough, give it a good, solid college try, measure how it works, and then iterate. These things also come and go in terms of efficacy. So channels that work at one point in time will stop working sometimes. Channels that didn't work before will start working again. It's just the management of an evolving process. It is not that you have a standard approach here. So don't try to get to perfect, get to good enough and execute it really well. Okay, we'll start off with business to consumer startups. And in business to consumer startups, you're trying to get in front of lots and lots of people quickly and do it in a very cost effective fashion. That channel represents, right, the channels we're going to talk about today are most of the stuff that we've seen really working in the modern environment and modern market. By far, most consumer brands these days are launched on social and they are launched with video being the dominant method of communication. So generally speaking, where we like to start with consumer brands is lots of videos that are out there that have cool, quick hooks that relate to the core problem we solve or the way that we solve that core problem. And so you're putting out lots of content out there. You're trying to get content that's catchy, that's interesting, that people can watch. And high volume hook driven videos are generally speaking short form videos. So 10 seconds long, 30 seconds long, easy for people to consume, easy for them to quickly understand what your product is doing. What we want is also that content feels native to the platform or organic to the platform. Like we're not trying to make ads for our product. We're trying to talk about the problem that our product solves and then subtly integrate that in. So what we want the content to feel like is something that people would organically produce on the platform. In particular, you would organically produce on the platform that is interesting and also happens to have some relevance to the product that we have. And our general experience here is that along with kind of like the general go-to-market concept of you're only ever going to get this to good enough, is you're not going to know what content works. So your best strategy is to try a bunch of different approaches. You can talk about the good benefits of your product from convenience. You can talk about how they save money. You can talk about how they improve status. You can talk about how they impact identity. You can talk about, goofiness of it. Like you're not going to know exactly what's going to work. And so while you don't want to just spam out content, ultimately your strategy is to put a high volume of content out there and see what actually works. And then what we do is we monitor what's actually happening. So we try a bunch of different stuff. We watch to see what works. And then ultimately the stuff that works, those are the things we then may promote later on. But again, core thing here is with social, what we see is video driven content is really working. And you want lots of quick, short videos that people can consume across multiple different devices, multiple different platforms. Another good strategy in consumer markets that we see a lot is going where the networks are. And in particular, people that already have social networks, you can generally partner with them to promote your product or promote your voice. And ultimately, that gives you a lot of social proof or validation out there. So there's lots and lots of creators that target very specific markets. Your job is to find those creators, build relationships with them, and ultimately truly get their input and feedback onto your product. And if you do that and you actually address that input and feedback, generally speaking, you will earn the right for them to promote your product, talk about your product, and actually put some oomph, if you will, behind it. The benefit of this also is the creators have a target that tends to be well aligned with your ICP. So we're looking for people that target the same set of people we want to target. They have some credibility with them, and ultimately they can ideally promote us to that. And that is one of the ways those creators are going to monetize their market. And if it's done thoughtfully, that tends not to be a problem for them, tends not to be a problem for you. It can basically be done above board. Um, We've listed search engine optimization, which is what SEO stands for, and content marketing as sort of the third slot. This used to be the number one thing that you worked on for consumer brands. So, search engine optimization or search engine marketing is basically how do you get a website in particular to work well in a search engine. So, if you're building an accessibility company and someone searches for accessibility, the classic example is that you come up first. This is still important. Tons of volume still goes to sites from search engines, basically. Google obviously being the primary one there. But it's starting to be a little less important. More and more, you're seeing AI queries pop up. People are talking to AI. You also see people discovering things through social media channels. So you still need to do this. You need to have a good basic strategy here. And that would be building your pages of your website around search terms that make sense, optimizing for those, making sure they're in there. But the reality is, people have been doing this for 25 plus years. And so the search engines are pretty good at understanding when they're being gamed and working through the gaming components of it. And ultimately, the amount of benefit that you get from this kind of just reduces over time. So we don't tend to focus a ton on SEO. You just got to do a good enough job there. We do still like content marketing, and content marketing is really just a different style of the video specific content generation we were talking about before. So content marketing is just, I'm going to create some useful, engaging, and interesting content that people in my ICP would likely read. Classic version of this is running a blog. You publish a newsletter from your blog, and it basically gives people that are interested in your market some useful information. So again, like the video, it's not ads, it's not detailed product specs. You can talk about that. It's really an interesting and useful point of view on the market or the business problem that you have to the people that are in the market. So we do like content marketing, and it goes hand in hand with SEO because a lot of content marketing does help you show up in search engines as well. Further down the list, you can get into paid ads. paid ads into two big categories: paid social and then search engine ads. Search engine go deeper on with pay-per-click ads versus network ads and things like that as well. So you can spend tons and tons of money on this and get really, really deep into it. This can also be a very, very effective way to scale your business if you can get a positive ROI on it. But it's also a great way to spend a ton of money without a ton of traction for your business. So what we recommend on paid is start small, be really tight in who you are targeting, and understand very specifically what you're trying to get out of it. So, right, you have a single message in an ad. It is targeted at a very concise market or an audience. It is coupled with a very, very tight call to action that includes an optimized landing page, which is where the ad actually goes. And if you follow those best practices, you can get some traction here. What we also like a lot on paid is targeting very specific people. You can do that on consumer side. It is a lot easier to do it on the business to business side. So we'll talk about that technique a little bit later on. But the point here on paid is paid can work well, but it is complicated and it is easy to spend a lot of money to not get a very good return here if you don't know what you're doing. So if you do want to go after paid, we would recommend working with a qualified third party, people that really know this, and there are tons of agencies that do it out there that are good at it. Last two categories we like a lot on go-to-market are referral, or what you'll hear referred to, or what you'll hear spoken about as virality loops. And then finally, just online communities. Referral loops are things like sharing buttons, inviting buttons, or other just natural things in your product that allow a current user of your product to get another user of your product for you. And most of the time, you offer incentives to do that. So, as an example, if you have a credit based system and someone refers someone in, you get 10 free credits or however many free credits are. Or you can upgrade people to sort of a premium tier, right? If you invite and register 10 of your friends, we will automatically make you a platinum level user of the system. These have to be natural, so they can't be sort of weirdly put into the product. It's got to make sense in the product. It's got to be, again, a reasonable sort of portion of the use of the product. But when you get these right, they are wildly, wildly powerful. And some of the software out there that has spread most effectively and is worth the most out there has spread through these referral and virality loops. Social networks alone are a good example of that, where as people get on social networks, they share it with more people who get on the network. That makes the network more valuable. And in turn, it just gets this very effective flywheel, right? Facebook has billions of users and has not paid lots of money to acquire those users. And that's created a tremendous value for them because they're very, very good at run virality loops. So that's one thing to really focus on. You may also hear that referred to as sort of a product-led growth strategy. That is a different thing, but there is a little bit of overlap there. And the last category we talk about a lot are just communities. You will find a lot of online communities out there. That can be things like particular Reddits and subreddits. It can be groups on LinkedIn. It could be in the old world, Usenet posts and things like that. There's no exact way this works, but a lot of the times, if you look, you can find online communities that target the audience that you target. And by going into the community and sharing usefully, not just as advertisements, but actually being a good community member, it can be a very effective way to get some traction early on and certainly learn a lot about your market. So we have had some real success with that, but there is no standard strategy for that. It is highly business specific. So that's business to consumer businesses. On business to business, the go-to-market strategies ultimately boil down to, in my opinion, trust and ultimately just getting access to a complicated set of buyers. Most business to business organizations that I've worked with pretty much start with founder led outbound. And so you have a founder, you may have a technical founder, you may have a non technical founder who's more market facing, but ultimately a lot of what they're doing is just reaching out to people in the market, building relationships up, and ultimately building trust in the founders. And the reason that tends to work really well in B2B is much more relationship and reputation dependent. And so ultimately, if I was starting a new business to business company and an enterprise buyer was spending $25,000, $30,000, $50,000 with me, they want to know me and they want to know that I know what I'm doing. And if something goes wrong with the software that they're buying, that I am there and I will actually back this up and I will do what is needed to fix it. So, founder credibility, domain expertise, those are really, really important in business to business versus in consumers. If you buy a product and it doesn't work, most of the times you're just going to go on to the next product. So, founder led outbound, in our experience, tends to be a big component of that. Building founder brands is a sort of portion of that. You do a lot of work going through professional networks. So people will do a lot of work going through email, doing LinkedIn outreach, connecting with people. There are lots of ways that you can do that. You can do sort of role specific breakouts. So if I have five different buyer roles that I target, I can target each of them in turn across my ICP. And in the same way in consumer, you really aren't going to know exactly what message resonates. So you got to try a lot. It's the same thing here in B2B. So it may be that an ROI message works. It may be that a compliance driven message works. It may be that just a pain reduction message works. It may be that a reputational message works. Like you're not going to know. And so you tend to just try a bunch of these different things and see what works. And because business buyers are constantly barraged by offers, you're also going to have to go across a lot of different channels. So it's not like in a consumer market where you may catch on and people will search for you and find you and buy your product. It tends to be much more outbound here. And we're going to try people on email. We're going to try them on LinkedIn. We're going to try them on SMS. Then we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to add in some ad tracking and tracking different networks. It requires a lot of impressions to actually get some traction in business to business. Events are more of a thing in B2B side than they are on the consumer side. And in particular, you'll hear referrals to thought leadership. So we were saying on the consumer side, it's important that you have credibility. It's important that you put together content. But honestly, it's more important that you're kind of catchy and interesting on the consumer side. On the business side, our experience is catchy and interesting is still very, very helpful, but you really have to know what you're talking about. In general, for business companies, people are buying software that does something very specific. It covers some domain space or domain area, and the business buyers want to know that you actually substantively know what you're talking about there. And so thought leadership pieces are things like webinars, white papers, long form articles that you're posting on LinkedIn or you're posting on Substack that it demonstrate that you really know what this business problem is. And ultimately, a company tends to be hiring you to address a business function, and software is the vehicle for doing that rather than a company just buying a piece of software. Another thing that we do see work in business to business that also is not as relevant as consumers are industry events. Conferences are kind of the best example of this, but it can also be speaking engagements and things like that. It's you're out there in the market and I've gone through the gauntlet of qualifying to speak at a conference, which means that you have the right resume and the background for that, and so on and so forth. And those can be interesting ways to actually build up some credibility in the market and then also obviously get some follow up conversations out of it as well. So we do like those. And then one interesting thing that we see a lot in business to business markets, less so in consumer markets, is sort of partner networks. And the classic version of a partner network would be I have a company that sells a platform. I build a plugin to their platform, and the goal of plugging into their platform is then using the network that that company has to go sell more of my solution. And you can see this in app stores as an example. So, like if you build an application, you stick it in the App Store then helps you deploy that application to millions and millions of people and millions of customers, and it's aggregated those customers together. Or you partner with a CRM vendor like HubSpot and you have plugged into HubSpot and you provide an extension to it, you can then go co-sell into the HubSpot ecosystem. So those can be pretty powerful if you have technology relationships or if you have channel relationships. You work together to basically create a combined value proposition and go out and sell those. They can also be tremendous wastes of time because a lot of the times the partners are interested in selling their software and their primary focus is not selling your software. So people can mistake these as sort of co-selling arrangements when in reality they tend to be more like co-marketing arrangements. But partners can be pretty powerful in B2B in the right scenario. All that said, all of this comes back to on either the B2B side or the B2C side, like, hey, how do I figure out how to go after these customers and get them? And the number one thing I would start with when you think about channels is just where are my customers spending time? So, as an example, if I have a B2B product, the sort of prevailing logic would be it doesn't make a lot of sense to advertise a B2B product in Facebook because Facebook is where people are going to have fun. But the reality is, your customers spend time in Facebook. And so it doesn't really matter to us if we get in front of them in LinkedIn or if we get in front of them in Facebook. An impression is an impression, and time in their headspace, time mind is time that we have their attention. So the first thing I would start with is where's your customer spending time? And then the second question is, can I pick out my customer in that particular medium? So, as an example, if I know my customers are spending time on YouTube, but I can't actually filter down in YouTube in a way that gets in front of those customers, it's probably not a great medium for me. On the other side of it, if I have specific search terms that make sense or specific categories that make sense, and they're very tightly aligned with my ICP, then that's a great medium for us. So, where's my customer spend time? Can I actually effectively target them in the medium? And then ultimately, what am I trying to get them to do? Do I want them to sign up for my product and try it out? Do I want them to, download a white paper? Do I want them to book a call with me? Whatever is the valuable action, I want to know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish with that. So all of this then falls into what we call the sales and marketing funnel. And so this is a little side note, but it's a very useful concept that'll come up a lot. And a sales and marketing funnel is just a set of steps that takes an organization or a person from being a prospect, which means someone that we reasonably could sell our product to an actual customer. And it's a funnel because each stage gets narrower and narrower, which means we have people falling out of this funnel at each step. So, as an example, if I have 100 people come in at the awareness stage, I might only have 50 at the sign up stage. I might have, 40 at the interest stage, 30 at the lead stage, 20 at the qualified stage. I might only get 10 opportunities out of that. And of those 10 opportunities, I might ultimately only win one. And so at each stage, we tend to narrow the funnel. And the percentage of people that move from stage to stage, that's what we were talking about before as a conversion rate. Marketing stages, or the way you would think about the progression of either an account or a person through marketing, tend to follow these different categories. And this can change between consumer and business to business companies, but in most cases, they tend to kind of go through these different things. So, first, person has to know that we exist, right? Somehow they have learned about our business. That can be through a search engine search. It can be through paid advertising that they have put in front of them. It could be through social content. But for them to do anything with us, they first got to know we exist. The second stage tends to be they have converted from someone we don't know exists to someone we explicitly know exists. So, like, they've signed up for a form, or they've signed up for an email list, or they've downloaded something. This basically means they're in our database, is a good way to think of that. So now we know not just that this person is aware that we exist, but they're actually interested in getting more information from us. There is a qualification that comes after that, which means there's a baseline level of they're in our database. But if we see them do different things with us, if they go to the website and browse pages, if they download things, if they watch a video, now we can start to gauge their interest level with us. And at some level that we define, we can say, hey, this person is actually interested in us. As they do more things, we eventually then say, hey, this person is actually worth probably having a conversation with. They may be willing to have a discussion with us about buying a solution from us. That would be what you would classically call a lead. And then ultimately, once you get a lead, then there is a qualification of that, which means not just is this person interested, and we know that, and they have articulated that back to us, it's they actually could be a legitimate buyer of our software. And a classic way to qualify leads that you'll hear is called BANT. That just means budget, authority, need, time frame. It means budget, they could spend the money on this. Authority, they have the ability to make the decision. Need, there's a logical reason for them to spend money. And timeline, they have some time frame in which it would make sense for them to spend money. You'll also see these things called like MAL, MQL, SAL, and SQL. You will occasionally hear these stages referred to that way. L is marketing acquired lead. That means they're in the database. MQL, marketing qualified lead. That means they have some level of interest that marketing says, hey, this person might be legitimately interested. SAL, a sales accepted lead. That means marketing is handed to a sales team and says, hey, you can go pursue them. And SQL is a sales qualified lead. That means a salesperson has had a conversation with them and said, yeah, this is a real opportunity for us. And you'll hear those terms a lot out there. So that's marketing. And again, marketing is about going from no awareness to, okay, this person legitimately might want to buy from us. Sales is taking them from this person may legitimately want to buy from us to, okay, they want us. And the sales process that we see a lot looks roughly like this. So first, there's some conversation or some transaction with a person where we learn more about them. We understand their needs, their pains, the buying process. Second, we help them understand what our solution is, presentation. Third, we give them something they can react to in terms of proposal for our solution to purchase it. They tell us they want to purchase it verbally. They actually go through the process of purchasing it via contracting and then a deal. In consumer markets, a lot of these steps are automated. Like the discovery process may be a person going to the site. The presentation process may be them actually using the solution. Proposal process could be them looking at a pricing page and just executing it. So we have them defined as really discrete stages here. But a lot of the times these can be accomplished with software as well. And it's very, very business dependent. There's lots and lots of measures you can put in place for this. So I won't go down that really deep rabbit hole at this point. But suffice to say, the idea here is we do want to measure each of these stages independently. So awareness, that's pretty much how broad we are in terms of getting our name out there. That's how many people are seeing us, what kind of traffic we get to the site, et cetera, right? Signing up, it's how good are we at taking that initial awareness and converting it into people registering for a database? Are they signing up for our email list? Are they downloading content, so on and so forth? And then each of the stages from there then has some more detailed measures that we can look at. And the idea here is we're optimizing each of these stages independently. So at awareness stage, we're really optimizing for getting as many people in and looking at our stuff as possible. Sign up stage, we're optimizing to try to convert the interest from one stage to the other, and so on and so forth. Okay, we'll talk about lead scoring and grading, and then we'll wrap up with just a quick example of how this stuff plays out. You'll hear two different concepts that actually run in parallel and sometimes can be confused around kind of effectively the quality of the lead, right? So not all of these leads are created equal. And also oftentimes you're trying to figure out really where should I spend my time? And so the two things we look at in parallel are what is the score of the lead? And basically what that is we give points to various activities. And then the more points you have, all things being equal, the higher the score is, the more well qualified you are. So as an example, if they open up a marketing email, we may say, hey, that's 5 points. But if they actually go through and like fill out a form to like log into a registrar or webinar like we have today, like maybe that's like 15 points. Like that's more important. If they go to a pricing page, that indicates they actually are interested in knowing how much this costs. That tends to be pretty well correlated with purchasing. All right, that's like the most valuable thing they could do. And then on the other side of it, if we don't see them doing anything for a certain period of time, we're going to start taking points away. So, right, after 30 days, we're going to subtract 25 points. After 10 days of inactivity, maybe we subtract 10 points, and so on and so forth. And so the idea here is we're scoring how engaged they are with us at any given point in time. And all things being equal, a higher score is better. The complement of that then is also grading them based on how good of a fit they are, particularly for your ICP, and then subpoints of your ICP, potentially also your personas. But most people will then look at, okay, I've defined my ICP. Are they really right in the center of that, or are they off target with us? So if they are the dead center of your ICP, right industry, right person, right usage context and problem, that's like a grade A, like lead. If they're like kind of a little off target, they're not quite as well qualified, maybe we call that a C. And if they're not aligned at all, they may be an F. And then what people do is you basically look at both of those factors to then figure out what you're going to do. So if it's got a good score and it's got a good grade, I'm going to go after those people. If it doesn't have a good score, but it's a good grade, that means they're not really ready to buy yet. So I want to develop those, or what we do is called nurturing those leads. If they have a good score, but they're a bad grade, if I'm putting sales time, energy, and effort into it, I may never get a sale because they're just not well qualified. But maybe it does end up with a sale. So I'm going to let them track on their own. And if it's a bad score and a bad grade, I'm not going to do anything with them at all. And so there isn't an exact dividing line on this. It's really more, again, the question, where am I going to spend my time? And the idea is I want to spend time with the people that have the most likelihood to buy, which is the grading, and then ultimately are the most engaged with us, which is the score. Okay. So what we're going to do this week then, and you'll get the prompts for this, and I'll show this how you works, is just do a very basic initial draft go-to-market plan. And the starting point for this, and I'll show you this in a second, is just company name, basic business model that you have. What's the ICP you're going to target? And what's the primary persona? And then the things I want you to think about are what is the message that you're going to take into market? How are you going to deliver that market? What are some strategies associated with it? And then how do you want to measure it? And so I did this a little earlier for the same example that we had last week, which is for ATC. Let me see if I have it here. Here we go. Okay. And so what I put into ChatGPT is I gave it the summary of the ATC business, which if you remember is a account-based marketing business. And this business serves marketing departments by basically taking in a bunch of content and helping to match that content with people. And ultimately does that via the CRM and sort of coordinates all these different components. And that is a business problem that is currently a highly manual process. So this automates a pretty painful manual process. We do that for the head of marketing, which is our primary buyer persona. And the markets that we're focusing on are what we call content heavy marketings or content rich industries. So it's industries where lots of content needs to be published, particularly like as an example, professional service providers like law firms or consulting firms. They want to build thought leadership. They have a lot of content. They want to manage it. And so what we asked the LLM to do here is, okay, take a look at the company and give me some ideas on what are some good core messages that our primary buyer persona would care about. What are some marketing channels and strategies that I can use? Ultimately, in that, how would you go? What is the specific using, and what are some of the approaches and strategies that you would use associated with that? Right. So for each of these channels, build me out the channel and then build me out the strategy. And so if we think about then core messages, came up with a couple of different options. So one is how do we turn content that we have into pipeline? Another one is around understanding the efficacy of various pieces of content, so on and so forth. Of those things, hey, it thinks the strongest message or the cleanest message is ultimately turning a content library into revenue engine, right? So how do I take an investment in content and turn it into something that's there? Ultimately, right? Air traffic control helps B2B marketing teams turn existing content into personal buyer journeys that increase engagement, improve follow-up, and ultimately let you make money by proven content ROI. And I can tell you that's pretty consistent with how we've actually positioned that company. How would you go about it? So independent of like the course that we just covered, right? This is what it came up with, the LLM, but it's obviously pretty consistent with the course. So, right, doing founder-led outbound, getting the founder brands out there and ultimately targeting a bunch of people that's in the market, working through LinkedIn and doing some thought leadership around that, launching your own ABM style campaigns, building out some content marketing efforts, and ultimately building out content around the brand, and then potentially doing additional things like webinars, paid LinkedIn ads, partnering, and so on and so forth. And so you can see some pretty significant options that you could have here and prioritize. And then ultimately, its analysis is look, if you're going to start somewhere, you probably want to do founder led outbound, LinkedIn thought leadership. You should have some content library offerings, so things that are lead capture vehicles. And maybe you want to do some executive roundtables and partnering as well. And I can tell you for this brand, our current go to market strategy would be some combination of 1, 2, 3, and 5. And so independent of what the LLM said, that's what we had come to as well. And then core messaging, right, is right, you have this content. How do you actually turn it into personalized buyers' journeys? Welcome to Starting a Technology Company.